The day my son told me to leave my own home, love turned to betrayal right before my eyes. What happened next became a story about second chances and quiet redemption. His wife stood behind him, arms crossed, calling it for my safety. I just nodded, packed my suitcase, and closed the door behind me. Because what they didn't know was that I'd already changed the will. I still remember the sound of their car pulling up that morning, the crunch of tires on the gravel drive I'd laid with my own hands. It was a sharp sound, too quick, too final. I was on the porch, trimming back the ivy that crept along the railings, when I saw Daniel step out of the driver's seat, his phone already in his hand. Behind him, Melissa climbed out slowly, smoothing her hair before she even looked at me. They hadn't been here in 2 years. "Dad," Daniel called, his voice bright but hollow. "We thought we'd surprise you." I smiled, though my heart felt like an old clock still working, but slower now. "Well," I said, setting down the clippers, "you certainly did." Melissa gave me one of her polished smiles. She always did, that smiled like she was being photographed. Her eyes swept over the porch, the peeling paint, the flower pots half filled with soil. "Still keeping busy, I see," she said lightly. "The kind of tone people use when they're judging you, but want you to think they're being kind." "Always something to tend to," I replied. "The house keeps me company." She nodded politely, then turned her attention to the front door as though she were already imagining it painted a new color. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil, the scent my late wife, Eleanor, loved. I'd kept her touches everywhere: the lace curtains, the floral teacups, the framed photographs along the hallway. When Melissa walked in, I could almost feel the shift in the air, the way she seemed to take ownership just by being there. Daniel followed behind her, glancing at the pictures. He stopped at one, a black and white photo of him as a boy, sitting on my shoulders beside the willow tree. He smiled faintly. "I used to climb that thing every summer," he said. "You did," I said softly. "Your mother used to say you were part monkey." He chuckled, but there was something in his laugh distance. Maybe guilt. I couldn't tell. Melissa ran her fingers along the banister. "This place has good bones," she said. "A little outdated, but solid." "Built it myself," I said. She looked mildly impressed. "Really?" "Every board. Every nail. Back when men didn't hire everything out." She laughed, a delicate sound. "Well, maybe we'll get you a contractor next time." The word we stuck in my ear like a thorn. She'd said it so casually, so naturally, as if the house already belonged to them. We sat down in the living room, sunlight pouring through the tall windows, casting gentle patterns across the floor. I poured coffee, my routine, my ritual. Daniel took his with sugar, Melissa declined. She was always watching her figure, or at least pretending to. "So," I asked, trying to sound casual, "what brings you here all of a sudden? Business trip? Family visit?" Melissa smiled again, that slow, deliberate kind of smile. "Oh, both, I suppose," she said. "Daniel's been under a lot of stress at work. We thought a little getaway might help him clear his head." Daniel nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah, come on to me. Needed a break." "I see," I said, stirring my coffee. "And of all places, you chose this old house." Melissa leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Well, it's home, isn't it? We thought maybe it's time to reconnect. Plus," she added with a glance toward the window, "this view is worth $1 million." She meant it as a joke, but her eyes lingered too long on the lake beyond the trees. I'd seen that look before on men who appraised land, not memories. After a moment, Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad, how have you been holding up? You're not getting lonely out here, are you?" I shrugged. "I've got my garden, my books, the radio. Keeps me busy." Melissa frowned. "But don't you think it's a little isolating? You're all alone out here. What if something happened?" Her concern sounded rehearsed, like a line she'd practiced in the car. "I've got neighbors close enough," I said. "And I've lived here 50 years without incident." She exchanged a quick glance with Daniel, the kind of look couples share when they're silently agreeing on something you're not meant to notice. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "We've just been thinking, maybe it's time to start talking about plans, the future. Your estate, your care, things like that." Ah, there it was. The visit's true purpose, neatly wrapped in filial concern. I smiled faintly. "You mean my will?" He hesitated. "Not just that. But yeah, It's good to be prepared. I already have one, I said evenly. Your mother and I made it years ago. Melissa tilted her head. Oh, I'm sure it's outdated by now. Laws change, you know. It might be smart to have someone review it. Maybe simplify things. Her tone was sweet as honey, but I could hear the hum of calculation underneath. I stood slowly, taking my cup to the sink. I'll think about it. She smiled again, though it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. We just want what's best for you. After lunch, Daniel went outside to take a call, pacing by the lake. His voice was low, agitated. Melissa stayed inside, wandering the house like a cat exploring new territory. I watched her from the kitchen doorway as she ran her hand along the fireplace mantel, picked up framed photos, peeked into the guest room. She stopped by the window and stared out toward the willow tree. That's where you buried her ashes, isn't it? She asked. Yes, I said quietly. It's lovely. Peaceful. She paused. Though I imagine this place is full of ghosts. I smiled, but not kindly. Only the kind that keep watch. That afternoon we had dinner, a quiet affair. Melissa complimented my cooking too effusively. Daniel barely spoke. When they retired to the guest room, I stepped out to the porch. The cold air sharpened my lungs. Across the water, the reflection of the willow trembled under the moonlight. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice, be gentle, Henry. But don't be blind. The next morning, I found Melissa already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She looked up and smiled. Hope you don't mind. I made some coffee. Not at all, I said. Early start? She hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. I was just helping Daniel organize some paperwork. You know, for the business. Numbers, property values, spreadsheets, all foreign territory to me now. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. You know, Daniel and I were thinking it might make things easier if we helped manage some of your property stuff. Bills, taxes, upkeep. You shouldn't have to worry about all that. I've been managing fine, I said, though gently. Of course, she said quickly. I just meant we could lighten the load. Maybe get some updates done. The roof looks a bit worn, and those windows probably cost a fortune to heat through. I can handle it, I said again. Daniel came down then, hair still damp from the shower. Mel, leave Dad be, he said with forced cheer. We didn't come here to talk business. But I could tell by the tightness in his shoulders that business was all he'd been thinking about. We spent the day doing simple things or pretending to. A walk by the lake, lunch in town. But there was a tension humming under every word. Melissa asked endless questions about the neighbors, the insurance, the lawyer who handled the deed. She called it catching up, but I could feel her eyes measuring the distance between what I had and what she thought she deserved. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat beneath the willow with a blanket around my shoulders. The air smelled of rain. The lake was still. I thought of Eleanor, her laughter, the way she used to brush soil from her hands after planting flowers by this very tree. You'd see right through her, I whispered. Somewhere inside the house, a floorboard creaked. I looked up through the window and saw a shadow move through the hall, someone in the study. The faint glow of a phone screen flickered against the glass. I didn't move. I just watched as Melissa leaned over my desk, snapping a quick picture of something, maybe the papers I'd left out earlier, the ones marked private. Then she turned off the light and slipped quietly back down the hall. When I finally went inside, the house was silent again. My papers were untouched, neatly stacked, just as I'd left them, but one drawer of the desk was slightly open. I closed it gently, locking it this time. Then I went back to the porch, watching the dawn begin to lift behind the trees. The first light brushed the willow leaves, and for a brief moment, the whole world looked golden like nothing could ever be taken from it. But deep down, I already knew something had changed. The wind carried it. The silence confirmed it. And as I stood there, feeling the cold wood beneath my hands, I understood that love could make you blind, but betrayal always made you see. Morning sunlight crept through the lace curtains, drawing quiet patterns across the kitchen floor. I sat at the table with my coffee, the same chipped mug Eleanor had painted blue when we first moved in. The house was still the kind of silence that holds both comfort and memory. Upstairs, I could hear faint movements, drawers opening, the soft clink of hangers. Our guests were settling in. I took another sip, letting the warmth ease my chest. For a moment, I pretended it was like the old days when Eleanor hummed while making breakfast, when Daniel ran down those stairs, barefoot and grinning, asking if he could fish before chores. But the past lives like a photograph left in the sun, the colors fade and the edges curl. They came downstairs together, Melissa with her hair perfectly brushed, Daniel looking tired, his phone already in hand. "Morning," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Morning, Dad," Daniel mumbled. Melissa smiled. "Smells wonderful in here. You're up early." "Always am. Habit I never broke." She laughed lightly. "You should teach Daniel that trick." He smiled weakly. "Mel's been trying for years." It was polite talk, empty and echoing. Still, I served them breakfast eggs, toast, and the blackberry jam Eleanor used to make. Melissa said she didn't eat carbs, then asked for seconds. After a few minutes of silence, she looked around. "You know, this place really is something," she said. "It has a kind of charm you can't buy anymore." I nodded. "That's because it wasn't bought. It was built." Daniel glanced up. "You never told me much about that, Dad." I smiled faintly, setting down my fork. "That's because you were too busy trying to leave." He winced, the way sons do when their fathers say something too true. Melissa changed the subject quickly. "Well, I'd love to hear about it," she said. "How you two started this whole thing." I looked toward the window, where the willow tree swayed gently by the water. "We were barely more than kids," I said. "Eleanor had just finished nursing school. I'd come home from the service. We bought this land back then. It was worthless, just wild ground near the lake. Everyone said we were crazy. But she saw something here. Said the water would keep us young." Melissa leaned forward. "And you built the house yourself?" "Every inch," I said softly. "We drew the plans on the kitchen table of our first apartment. I hammered the beams. She painted the walls. When Daniel was born, we planted that willow together, right over there." I pointed through the window. The tree shimmered in the light, its long branches brushing the water's edge. "Eleanor used to say it was our promise tree that as long as it stood, our love would too." I didn't tell them that part. "Some things are sacred." Melissa smiled faintly. "It's beautiful," she said. "And this whole area, it must be worth quite a bit now, with all the development." There it was again, that quick shift from admiration to appraisal. I felt it like a cold draft. "Developers have been sniffing around," I said. "Offered to buy it a few times, but I told them no." Daniel looked up from his phone. "Really? How much did they offer?" "Enough to make me laugh," I said. "But this isn't a property. It's home." Melissa tilted her head, that same polite curiosity masking calculation. "Of course," she said. "It's just times change, you know. These old houses can become a burden." I smiled. "Only if you forget what they mean." The rest of the morning passed quietly. Daniel went outside to check his messages, pacing near the dock. Melissa wandered the rooms again, this time taking pictures. She said it was for memories. I didn't believe her. After lunch, I took them on a small tour of the house, not because they asked, but because I needed to remember what it had been before their eyes turned it into something transactional. We started in the living room. "Eleanor loved this space," I said. "That fireplace took me 3 weeks. The stones are from the old quarry up the road. We'd light a fire every Christmas morning, even if it was warm." I traced my fingers along the mantel. Eleanor's candle holder still sat there, a bit tarnished but standing guard. Melissa smiled tightly. "It's very cozy," she said, "though it could use updating." I ignored that. We walked down the hall where Daniel's childhood drawings were still framed crayon suns and stick figures holding hands. Melissa paused at one. "He was quite the artist." "He was," I said. "Used to say he'd build houses like his dad." Daniel smiled faintly. "Guess I took a different route." "You did," I said. "But you still build things, deals, dreams, empires. Just not with your hands." He didn't answer. Upstairs, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Eleanor's old sewing room was still just as she'd left it, spools of thread. The worn fabric she never finished turning into curtains. Melissa looked around quietly. For a brief second, I thought I saw something real in her expression, something like understanding. "She must have loved this room," she said softly. "She did," I said. "It was her kingdom." When we came back down, I noticed Daniel studying the large grandfather clock near the stairs. You ever think about selling some of these old things, Dad? He asked. You could make a fortune on antiques. Some things don't have a price tag, I said. You'll understand that someday. He laughed under his breath, not unkindly, just uncertain, like he was caught between two loyalties, his father's heart and his wife's ambition. That afternoon, while they rested, I stepped outside to prune the garden. The willow's leaves whispered softly above me, their green turning faintly gold with the season. I looked up into its branches and felt that same quiet peace I used to feel when Eleanor was near. But it didn't last. The sound of voices drifted through the open window, sharp, hushed, urgent. I told you it's not that simple, Daniel said. It is, Melissa hissed. He's alone, he's old, and he doesn't have anyone else. You said yourself the property's still in his name. Once we... Her voice dropped too low to hear. I froze, hands still on the shears. Daniel sighed. Just give me time. He trusts me. Melissa's tone softened, coaxing. I'm not saying take advantage. I'm saying protect what's coming to us. I stood there beneath the willow, every muscle tight, the pruning shears trembling slightly in my hand. The wind rustled through the branches, and for a moment, it felt like the tree itself was listening, bearing witness to the words that would break its roots. When their voices faded, I went back to my chair by the water and sat in silence. The lake shimmered under the late sun, but something in me had shifted. I realized then that love, once taken for granted, becomes leverage in the wrong hands. Later that evening, Daniel came out to join me on the porch. He stood for a long time before speaking. You okay, Dad? I'm fine, I said. Why wouldn't I be? He hesitated. You seemed quiet at lunch. I was remembering, I said. This place holds a lot of memories. Hard to keep them all still. He nodded, hands shoved in his pockets. You know, Melissa means well. She just wants to make sure you're taken care of. I know, I said softly. Everyone wants what's best for me. He gave a small laugh, uncertain. Guess so. The sun dipped lower, painting the water in shades of copper and rose. We sat in silence a while longer. Finally, he said, it's strange. I always thought I'd end up here someday. You know, raising my kids where I grew up. Stranger things have happened, I said. Just make sure when you do, it's because of love, not because you think it's owed to you. He frowned slightly but said nothing. Eventually, he went back inside. I stayed out until the stars appeared, the air cooling against my skin. The willow swayed beside me, its branches brushing the ground in long, sorrowful arcs. I thought of Eleanor again, her laughter, her faith that goodness always came back around in the end. Seems the lesson's still being taught, I whispered. Inside, the light from the study glowed faintly through the curtains. I could see Melissa's silhouette sitting at my desk again, papers spread before her. Her head tilted toward the lamplight, her fingers tracing the edges of a folder she had no reason to open. I watched her for a long time, quiet and still, until she finally stood and closed the drawer. Then she turned off the light. The darkness folded around the house again, soft but certain. I could feel Eleanor's presence then, not in comfort, but in warning. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the creaks and sighs of the house, the heartbeat of something alive, something loyal. And I realized that homes are like people. They remember kindness, but they also remember trespass. When the wind moved through the willow, it sounded like a whisper through time, a promise that truth, like roots, always finds its way back to the surface. The rain started that morning, thin and steady, the kind that makes the world look blurred around the edges. I woke early before the others and made coffee by the kitchen window. The willow tree shimmered with droplets, each leaf trembling as though whispering something I wasn't meant to hear. For a long while, I just stood there, watching the water trail down the glass. There's a kind of peace in silence, but also a warning. When I turned around, Melissa was already up. She moved quietly like she'd been awake for hours. Her hair was neat, her smile quick. Morning, she said. Couldn't sleep. The rain's soothing, isn't it? I nodded. For some, she carried a small folder in her hand, glossy, new, and completely out of place among the worn surfaces of my kitchen. Daniel's still asleep, she said, sitting across from me. I thought maybe we could go over a few things while it's quiet. Things? Oh, just practical stuff. She smiled the way real estate agents do when they sense hesitation. Bills, insurance, your home maintenance account. You said yesterday you've been managing it all yourself. I have, I said, stirring my coffee. Well, we just want to help, she continued, opening the folder. Daniel's been worried about you handling everything alone. I made a checklist, just to get organized. Inside were neatly printed pages, financial summaries, property records, contact numbers I didn't recognize. The first page bore the title Estate Simplification Plan. It had my name typed across the top. You've been busy, I said quietly. She laughed. I'm a planner. Always have been. She slid one of the sheets toward me. This one's just an authorization form. It lets Daniel take care of small things for you. Nothing major. Saves you from having to deal with phone calls or signatures. I studied the paper. It looked harmless, just a few lines, a signature box at the bottom. But something about the phrasing felt too neat, too practiced. Why the rush, I asked. She leaned back slightly. No rush, just being proactive. We can't always predict the future. No, I said, but we can decide who holds the pen when it gets here. Her smile faltered just a little. I don't understand. I think you do, I said softly. For a moment, we just looked at each other, her eyes bright and calculating, mine steady. Then Daniel entered the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? Melissa smiled again, quick to recover. Just helping your dad with some paperwork. Daniel frowned. Mel, maybe don't overwhelm him first thing in the morning. I'm not overwhelming him, she said, her tone light but edged. I'm trying to make sure he's protected. I folded the paper neatly once. I'm perfectly capable of protecting myself, I said. Been doing it since before you two could spell it. Daniel's face tightened. Dad, she's just... I know what she's doing, I interrupted gently, and I appreciate the concern. But my affairs are my own. Melissa's jaw tensed. She gathered her papers with a crisp motion and slipped them back into the folder. Of course, I was just trying to help. I know, I said. That's what makes it dangerous. She looked at me for a long moment, long enough to understand that I wasn't fooled. Then she smiled again, but it was thinner now, colder. After breakfast, she stayed upstairs for most of the morning. I could hear the faint click of her laptop keys through the floorboards. Daniel joined me on the porch, trying for small talk. You always said Mom loved this rain, he said. She did, I replied. She said it kept the world honest. He smiled faintly. Mel's just trying to plan ahead. You know how she gets. I know, I said. But planning for someone else's life isn't the same as caring about it. He looked down at his hands. You think I don't see it too? I turned toward him. Do you? He hesitated. She means well, Dad. She really does. Good intentions are easy, I said. It's what follows them that shows the truth. He didn't answer. Instead, he checked his phone again, always checking, as though afraid to miss something that mattered more than this moment. That afternoon, while they drove into town, I went into the study. The smell of paper and dust comforted me. Eleanor's handwriting still lingered in the margins of old notebooks. I opened the drawer where I kept my legal documents, the deed, the will, the letters from our lawyer, Margaret. Everything was there, still untouched. But as I closed the drawer, I noticed the faintest smear of fingerprints on the handle, not mine. Later, when they returned, Melissa was uncharacteristically quiet. Daniel carried grocery bags, trying to make conversation. Mel found this new cafe, he said. You'd like it, reminds me of Mom's baking. Melissa nodded, her smile too tight. Yes, maybe we can all go tomorrow. I looked at her hands, her nails perfectly done, but one of them faintly smudged with ink. From a fountain pen, perhaps. My fountain pen. The one I'd left on my desk that morning. After dinner, Daniel went out to take a business call. I stayed in the kitchen cleaning dishes while Melissa lingered nearby, pretending to help. Her reflection wavered in the window, poised, restless, calculating. You really shouldn't be so suspicious, you know, she said suddenly. I didn't turn around. Suspicion keeps old men alive. You make it sound like I'm plotting something. I set the plate down carefully. Aren't you? She stepped closer. I care about this family. Then stop treating it like an investment. She drew in a breath. You're being unfair. Maybe, I said. But unfairness is something you earn. Her voice dropped, cold and sharp. You think you're the only one who loved this house? You think you're the only one who deserves something from it? Daniel is your son. He's been working himself to the bone, while you sit here clinging to memories. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. Memories are all that's left when people stop honoring what came before them. For a heartbeat, we stood like that, the rain pattering against the glass, her breathing shallow, mine steady. Then she smiled again, softer this time. You really don't trust anyone, do you? I trust time, I said. It always tells the truth. She left the room without another word. That night, Daniel came to say goodnight, but there was worry in his eyes. Dad, he said quietly, I know things feel strange. Mel just wants to help. I know what she wants, I said. I just don't think you do. He sighed. You're reading too much into everything. Maybe, I said. But I've learned that reading between the lines is how you find what people don't write down. He gave me a long, searching look, part son, part stranger, and then he left. When the house finally went still, I walked out to the porch again. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and clean. The willow tree stood quiet, glistening under the moonlight. I sat beneath it, my old jacket wrapped around me, and thought about the papers she'd shown me. Simple documents, they'd said. Nothing major. Paper shadows. The kind that only takes shape when light hits deceit from the right angle. I closed my eyes and listened to the soft rustle of leaves. Somewhere inside me, the first ember of resolve began to glow small, steady, patient. I'd let them play their game a little longer. Let them think they were winning, because I'd already begun mine. It rained through the night again, the kind of slow, steady rain that settles deep into the earth. By morning, the air was heavy with the smell of wet leaves and pine. I woke before sunrise, as I always did, and walked through the house in my slippers, listening to it breathe the creak of the old boards, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the heartbeat of a place that had outlived everyone but me. Melissa and Daniel were still asleep. I stood by the window, sipping coffee, watching mist rise off the lake. The willow bent low, its long arms brushing the water. There was something different about the air that morning, a kind of stillness that made every sound too clear, too sharp. When I turned from the window, my eyes fell on the desk in the study, a drawer slightly open, just enough to notice. At first, I thought maybe I'd left it that way, but I'd checked those drawers the night before. Every one of them had been closed, locked. I'd even touched the key twice before bed, making sure it was still in my pocket. Now it was open. I didn't move right away. I simply stared at that inch of shadow, feeling my pulse slow rather than quicken. Old age has a way of dulling panic. It trades it for a heavier, colder thing. Certainty. When I finally stepped closer, I saw that the lock had been turned neatly, not forced. The papers inside looked undisturbed, but something was missing. The cream-colored envelope that held my deed, the original one, with Eleanor's handwriting in the margins, wasn't there. I opened the next drawer, then the next. Every folder was in its place, every paper aligned like soldiers in a row, except that one. The rain tapped against the window again, light and even, as though it were pretending nothing was wrong. From upstairs came the faint sound of a door opening, footsteps on the landing. I closed the drawer softly, pocketed the key, and went back to the kitchen. Melissa came down first, wrapped in a robe, her hair pinned perfectly. She smiled when she saw me. You're up early again, she said. Couldn't sleep. Daniel followed soon after, yawning. Smells good, he said, though I hadn't cooked anything yet. We sat together, the three of us pretending at normalcy. Melissa talked about the weather, about some property her company had listed, about how the market was wild this year. She said it like she was speaking to herself, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. I waited for one of them to mention the study, the papers, anything. But they didn't, and I didn't ask. When breakfast ended, Daniel said he was heading into town to check something for work. Melissa decided to go with him. They left around 9. As the car rolled down the gravel drive, I stood at the window again, watching the spray rise behind their tires. The house fell silent. I walked back into the study. The room smelled faintly of lavender polish, not mine. The desk gleamed slightly as though someone had wiped it down. I pulled open the drawer again and stared at the space where the envelope had been. For a long time, I just looked at the emptiness, the way a man might look at a gravestone. Then I opened the bottom drawer, where I kept a folder of copies, not the real documents, just old duplicates. I flipped through until I found the file marked Property Whitmore Residence. The top copy of the deed was still there, but something caught my eye. The signature line, my name Henry Whitmore, written twice. The first was mine, faded and steady. The second, slightly darker, thicker at the loop of the W. Someone had traced over it. I took off my glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose. There was a faint tremor in my hand, not from fear, but from something older, disappointment, maybe. A tired kind of grief. I held the paper to the light, studying it. The forgery was good practiced, careful. But no one knows a man's own name like the man himself. A sound behind me, the faintest creak of a floorboard in the hallway. I turned, the paper still in my hand. Dad? Daniel's voice. Calm, casual. I folded the paper before he entered. Morning, I said. He leaned against the door frame, smiling like he hadn't been in the hallway at all. We forgot your newspaper in town, he said. Mel's running back to grab it. I see. I set the folded paper down on the desk. He stepped in, his eyes flicking briefly toward it before looking at me again. You all right? You look pale. Just tired, I said. Didn't sleep much. Yes, same here, he said, though his voice carried that restless edge again, guilt disguised as fatigue. He walked over to the window, hands in his pockets. You know, Mel's been thinking we might fix up the place. Maybe repaint, update the wiring, make it safer for you. Safer, I repeated quietly. Yeah. She says it's just a matter of time before something gives out. Roof, pipes, anything really. Maybe she's right, I said. But if anything gives out, I'll fix it myself. He turned and smiled faintly. You really don't trust anyone else to touch this place, do you? I trusted your mother, I said. And I trusted you. That last sentence hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he said softly, you still can. He left before I could answer. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where he'd been. The sound of the car returned down the driveway a few minutes later. Melissa came in with a brown paper bag and the newspaper on top. I grabbed you the local, she said brightly. They're running a feature on historic homes. Thought you might like it. I thanked her, taking it with a steady hand. The headline caught my eye, Lakefront Estates on the rise, new developers seek legacy properties. Beneath it, a photo of the lake, my lake, shimmering in the morning light. The same view from my porch. That afternoon, they said they were heading into town again, this time to meet an old friend for lunch. I nodded, pretending not to care. When their car disappeared around the bend, I went straight to the study, shut the door, and locked it. I took the copy of the deed again, laid it flat on the desk. Then I opened the top drawer where I kept an old magnifying glass, the kind Eleanor used for cross-stitching. I ran the lens slowly across the signature. The ink shimmered unevenly, fresh in places where it should have been dull. There was no denying it now. Someone had taken my signature, forged it, and removed the original. But why and for what? I didn't have to ask. I already knew. I placed the paper back in the folder, sealed it in a new envelope, and tucked it under the false bottom of the drawer, a trick I'd built into the desk years ago. Then I sat in the armchair by the window, staring out toward the lake. The sun was slipping behind the trees, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gray. The willow's reflection rippled faintly in the water. I thought of Eleanor again, her steady hands, her voice soft but unyielding. Don't fight anger with anger, she'd say. It only feeds the fire. Let truth do the burning. I smiled to myself. I'm trying, love, I whispered. When I finally heard the car return, I stayed seated. Their voices carried through the hallway, laughter, light, almost musical. It would have fooled anyone who didn't know better. Melissa appeared in the doorway, her face glowing from the cold air outside. You all right, Henry? She asked sweetly. Never better, I said. I brought you a slice of pie from the cafe, she added, setting it on the desk. You should eat something. I will, I said. Later. She lingered a moment, her eyes scanning the desk. You've been busy, she said. Working on anything important? Just memories, I said. She smiled, her eyes narrowing slightly, then left. When the house went quiet again, I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. The faint hum of the heater filled the silence. I could hear their footsteps upstairs, the low murmur of conversation, the sound of a drawer opening, maybe another drawer, maybe the same one. I didn't move. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the willow branches. The sound was soft but insistent, like breath against glass. I opened my eyes and whispered to the empty room. It started. The storm broke sometime after midnight. By dawn, the air was washed clean, the kind of pale morning light that makes everything look newly made. I moved through the house slowly, hearing the soft drip of water from the porch eaves, the whisper of the willow outside shaking itself dry. Melissa and Daniel were still upstairs. The floor above me creaked once, then fell silent again. I brewed coffee, its smell filling the kitchen like a memory of easier years. The first sip steadied me. I'd spent the night turning the same thought over and over, not anger, just truth. The deed was gone. And something in me had gone with it. I needed air. When I stepped onto the porch, the world smelled of wet earth and pine. The sky hung low and gray, and the lake lay flat as glass. That was when I saw him, old Ben Hughes, my nearest neighbor, pulling his truck to the end of my drive. Ben had lived 2 coves over since before Daniel was born. He climbed out, waved, and called, "Morning, Henry. You all right after that rain?" I managed to nod. Still standing. Ben wiped his hands on his jacket. "Good to hear. Listen, ran into a fella in town yesterday, said he was looking at lakeside properties. Mentioned he'd heard this one might be up for sale." The word slid into the morning air like a stone into water. "Did he?" I asked. "Yeah. I told him you'd never sell. Figured he must have got his wires crossed." "Probably did," I said, keeping my tone easy. "Appreciate you setting him straight." Ben smiled. "Wouldn't feel right if I didn't. Anyhow, we're firing up the grill later if you want to drop by." "Thanks, Ben. I might do that." He tipped his cap and drove off, the crunch of tires fading down the road. I stood there long after the sound was gone. So they'd started talking. Not just inside this house, but outside it. My home, the story of my life, was becoming a rumor. I walked to the edge of the yard, where the grass dipped toward the lake. The willow waited, silver and dripping, its branches trailing the water like fingers tracing old scars. Every step toward it felt heavier than the one before. I'd planted that tree with Eleanor on the first spring after we moved here. She was barefoot in the mud, laughing because I'd misjudged the hole's depth and splashed both of us with clay. She said the willow would outlive us and keep our promises for us. Now I wasn't sure what promises were left to keep. I settled onto the old bench beneath it, the wood damp but solid. The lake was quiet except for the slow plunk of a fish rising. From here I could see the whole house, its weathered siding, the porch, where Daniel had learned to walk, the upstairs window where Eleanor once waved to me while I came in from the fields. For a moment it looked peaceful. Then I thought of the missing envelope, the traced signature, the neighbor's casual words up for sale. My hands tightened on my knees. "I didn't think it would come to this," I said softly, though no one was there to hear. "Not you, Daniel." A breeze lifted through the willow branches, scattering droplets that caught the light like tiny shards of glass. It almost sounded like a voice, gentle but firm, the way Eleanor used to speak when I'd grown stubborn. I closed my eyes and listened. She'd tell me not to meet cruelty with cruelty. She'd remind me that truth has its own patience. I could almost hear her say, "You built this place with your hands, Henry. Now keep it with your heart." That thought steadied me more than any threat could have. I sat there a long while, breathing the scent of wet grass and bark. The anger inside me cooled into something clearer, not forgiveness yet, but resolve. There was power in stillness, I realized. Power in knowing the difference between what can be taken and what can't. Money could change hands, papers could be forged, but love, real love, wasn't transferable. This land held Eleanor's laughter, Daniel's first steps, the rhythm of every nail I'd hammered. No ink on paper could erase that. When the clouds began to thin, light spilled through the branches in long, trembling stripes. I watched them shift across my hands. The gold made the lines of my skin look like roots old, twisted but still reaching. From the house came the faint sound of voices. Melissa's sharp tone, Daniel's lower murmur. I couldn't hear words, only the cadence and patience wrapped in secrecy. I let it wash over me without moving. The willow swayed gently, its leaves brushing my shoulders like a benediction. I'll handle this my way, I whispered. No one else would hear that promise, but the tree seemed to understand. Its branches bent lower, as if listening. Somewhere deep in the trunk, a drop of rain slid from leaf to leaf until it landed on my palm. I looked at it glimmering there, a perfect circle, whole for only a heartbeat before it slipped away. Everything beautiful is temporary, Eleanor used to say. But the meaning we leave behind that lasts. I rose slowly from the bench. My knees protested, but my back felt straighter than it had in weeks. The ache of confusion was gone, and its place was something heavier, steadier. Purpose. When I turned back toward the house, the windows caught a flash of sunlight. For a moment, they looked like eyes watching, waiting. I smiled, faint but certain. Whatever game was unfolding inside those walls, it would meet its answer in time. As I started back up the hill, the wind picked up again, driving ripples across the lake. The willow's reflection wavered and righted itself, as though bowing before standing tall again. At the porch steps, I paused, glancing over my shoulder one last time. The tree swayed in the distance, steady against the changing light. The willow never lied to me, I said under my breath. And today it told me exactly what I have to do. Then I opened the door and stepped inside. It happened 3 days after the rain stopped. The house had fallen into an uneasy quiet, that kind of silence where every sound feels rehearsed. Daniel and Melissa had been whispering more, closing doors gently, speaking to me with a new, careful sweetness that didn't match their eyes. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how close it was. That morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, catching dust motes in its beam. I was sitting at the table, trimming a handful of fresh herbs from the garden, when I heard the click of heels behind me. "Morning," Melissa said. Her tone was crisp, businesslike. Daniel followed a few steps behind her, holding a folded envelope. He looked pale, uncertain. I smiled because that's what they expected. "You both look serious," I said. Melissa exhaled lightly, the kind of sigh someone gives before breaking news they practiced in a mirror. "Henry," she began, "we've been talking, and we think it's time you considered a change." "A change," I repeated, setting down the knife. Daniel shifted his weight. "Mel and I, we just want you safe, Dad. That's all." "Safe from what?" Melissa stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "From being alone. From the risks of living out here by yourself. We've already looked at some assisted living communities. Beautiful places near town, with gardens and nurses and people your age." Her words floated like perfume, sweet, practiced, choking. I took a slow breath. "You think I can't take care of myself?" Daniel tried to smile. "You've done amazing, Dad, but you're 81. Things happen. You could fall or sign the wrong paper," I said quietly. The room froze. The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence between us. Melissa's smile faltered, then returned tighter. "What are you talking about?" I looked at Daniel. His eyes flicked to the counter, then back to me. That was answer enough. "I found the copy," I said. "The one someone tried to trace." For a long moment, no one moved. Melissa's hand tightened on the back of the chair. Daniel's voice came out small. "Dad, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I said. He looked to his wife. She stepped in smoothly, voice low and even. "It was a misunderstanding. We only wanted to make sure everything was organized. The lawyer said you might need an updated deed and—" "The lawyer," I interrupted. "Which lawyer would that be? Not mine." She hesitated. "A friend of Daniel's. He just helped us draft a few documents." "Documents with my name on them," I said. Her lips parted, but no words came. Daniel took a step forward. "Dad, please. It wasn't like that. We thought you'd want us to handle things." I looked at my son, the man I'd taught to fish, to drive, to keep his word. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. I saw the boy he used to be hiding behind a grown man's guilt. "Handle things," I said softly. "That's one way to put it." Melissa straightened. "We're just trying to do what's best for you," she said. "You're being emotional." Emotional, I stood slowly. My knees ached, but I didn't mind it. No, Melissa. I'm being patient. There's a difference. Her jaw tightened. This isn't fair. You're turning everything into an accusation. Truth doesn't need my help to sound like one, I said. The calmness in my voice must have unnerved her, because she turned to Daniel sharply. Say something, she hissed. Daniel swallowed. Dad, please. Let's not fight. Let's just move forward, okay? We'll help you pack a few things. You can stay with us while we sort the paperwork. Sort the paperwork, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? He ran a hand through his hair. You're making this harder than it has to be. Son, I said gently, you have no idea how easy I'm making it. He blinked. What? I picked up my cup, took one last sip of coffee and set it down. The sunlight had shifted, falling across the table between us like a bright dividing line. I stayed on my side of it. You're both welcome to stay here as long as you need, I said quietly. But if you're asking me to leave my home, the one I built, the one your mother filled with her love, I think you've already answered your own question about who's safe and who isn't. Melissa's eyes hardened. You can't live like this forever, she said. You'll see that soon enough. I see plenty, I said. The phone rang just then, a small mercy. I walked to answer it while they whispered behind me. It was Ben, the neighbor. His voice was hesitant. Henry, I hope I'm not intruding. Just wanted to let you know, saw your son at the post office earlier. Looked like he was mailing some official forms. Said it was about the house. I see, I said softly. Thanks, Ben. When I turned back, Melissa was standing near the doorway, coat already on. Daniel stood beside her, head lowered. We'll give you some time to think, she said. I've already thought, I replied. They left without another word. The door shut and the house sighed. That's the only way to describe it, like it had been holding its breath. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at everything that remained unchanged, the curtains Eleanor had sewn, the family photos, the faint smell of her rosewater perfume still clinging to the air after all these years. And yet everything felt different. They were going to take it from me, not just the house, but the history in its walls. And I realized then that the fight wasn't for wood and nails. It was for memory, for the truth of who I'd been and who I still was. A knock startled me. I opened the door to find Melissa again, raincoat half buttoned, eyes sharp. She must have turned back halfway down the drive. One last thing, she said. Daniel's too kind to say it, but this is happening whether you agree or not. The paperwork's already moving. You should start preparing yourself. I met her gaze without blinking. You should start wondering what else you don't know. Her mouth twitched. Excuse me? But I didn't answer. I simply stepped back inside and closed the door. The lock clicked softly like punctuation. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something else. Power, maybe. The kind that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself. That night, I packed a small suitcase, not because they told me to, but because I wanted to. There's a kind of grace in leaving before you're thrown out. I placed my essentials inside clothes, my shaving kit, Eleanor's locket, and one photograph of Daniel as a child, sitting beneath the willow tree with his mother. When the sun began to set, I walked outside, carrying the case to the porch. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain. The willow glowed faintly in the evening light, silver green against the lake. I sat on the steps, the suitcase at my feet. Somewhere inside, I could hear them upstairs, moving drawers opening, whispers traveling down the stairwell. They were making space for themselves. I didn't stop them. I didn't call out. I just watched the last of the sunlight fade behind the willow, turning its leaves to gold. A bird fluttered through its branches and landed near the bench below. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice again, gentle, certain. Hold your ground, Henry. Roots don't run for storms. I smiled. When darkness settled fully, I stood and picked up my suitcase. The house lights flickered on behind me, shadows moving in the windows. I looked back one last time. It wasn't defeat I felt. It was clarity, that rare, still moment when loss turns into purpose. The willow rustled softly, and I knew it was watching, keeping witness. As I walked down the path toward the lake road, the gravel crunching under my shoes, I whispered to the night, "You can take the house." but not the home. And with that, I kept walking. The motel room smelled faintly of coffee and rain. A single lamp burned beside the bed, throwing a circle of light over the small table where I'd set my suitcase. I hadn't slept much since leaving the house, but for the first time in days, my heart felt still. The air here carried no whispers, no careful footsteps, no rehearsed concern. Just quiet. Ben Hughes had driven me into town the evening before. He hadn't asked questions, only said, "You've got a place to breathe if you need it." Good man, Ben. I told him I might stay at the old Lakeside Inn for a bit, cheap, clean, anonymous. Now morning pressed against the window, pale and thin. I poured the last of yesterday's coffee into a paper cup and sat by the window, watching mist rise off the lake below. I wondered whether Daniel had noticed my empty room yet, whether Melissa had already called someone, pretending confusion, outrage. They'd wake soon enough to a different kind of silence. The phone on the table buzzed. A number I hadn't seen in years flashed across the screen. Margaret Fielding, Eleanor's old friend, our lawyer, the one who drafted every paper we ever signed. I answered. "Henry," she said, her voice warm but steady. "I heard you've had company at the lake." "News travels fast," I said. "Ben stopped by my office," she replied. "He said something didn't sit right with him. I thought I'd check in." I hesitated, then said, "They forged my name, Margaret. The deed's gone." Silence on the line, the kind that weighs more than words. "I see," she said finally. "Then it's time we open the envelope." My chest tightened. "You still have it?" "Locked in the safe, just as you asked me to keep it. You told me to wait until you called." I closed my eyes. "Then I'm calling. Come by after lunch," she said. "We'll go through everything." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, feeling both lighter and older. The plan I'd made years ago, the quiet precaution Eleanor had encouraged, was still there, waiting. Not revenge, protection. Proof that love had built this house honestly, and that honesty would defend it. By afternoon, I was sitting across from Margaret in her small office overlooking the main street. The place smelled of lemon polish and paper. She was as I remembered, silver hair pinned back, eyes sharp enough to cut through pretense. "I kept everything exactly as you left it," she said, opening the safe. From it, she withdrew a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. She set it gently on the desk between us. Inside lay copies of the real will, the one Eleanor and I had signed long before Daniel married Melissa. It placed the house and surrounding land into a charitable trust in Eleanor's name, meant to be preserved as a community garden and rest home someday. Daniel would inherit only what wasn't tied to the foundation enough to live, enough to remember, but not enough to forget where he came from. Margaret studied my face. "Do you want to proceed?" I nodded. Quietly. "For now. I can file the trust confirmation today," she said. "Once it's logged, no sale or transfer can be recorded without my notice." "Then do it." She smiled almost sadly. "Eleanor would be proud of how you've handled this." "I hope so," I said. She taught me patience. I'm finally using it. That evening, back at the motel, I turned on the small television for noise. The news hummed softly in the background while I sat by the window again. Outside, dusk gathered like ink. Across the water, I could almost see the faint glow of my old house through the trees. I pictured them there, Melissa pacing, Daniel trying to calm her, the house lights flickering on one by one as night crept in. Maybe they were waiting for me to call, expecting pleading, surrender. Instead, they'd soon get silence, and then paperwork from Margaret's office that would tell them the truth. A different kind of storm was coming. As I sat there, my phone vibrated again. A message from Daniel. "Dad, where are you? We can fix this." "Please." No message from Melissa. That said enough. I didn't reply. Some lessons need the weight of silence to be heard. I opened my notebook instead and began to write, not to them, but to Eleanor. "You were right again, love. Time tells the truth. It's strange, but I don't feel angry anymore. Just tired and grateful that the roots we planted still hold. If he ever finds his way back to that tree, I'll forgive him. But he'll have to look for himself first." I closed the notebook, the page still damp from my unsteady hand, and set it beside the lamp. Meanwhile, miles away in the house that had once been mine, the silence finally broke. Melissa's voice echoed through the living room. What do you mean the trust owns it? That's impossible. Daniel's reply was lower, shaky. Margaret Fielding called. She said the transfer was finalized years ago. Dad and Mom did it together. She's lying, Melissa snapped. He couldn't. But Daniel knew better. He'd seen his father's handwriting too many times not to recognize it. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. I told you he'd left everything to us, she said, pacing. You told me. I thought he did, Daniel murmured. I thought. Melissa stopped, eyes flashing. So we get nothing? He didn't answer. Outside, the wind rose, bending the willow's branches until they scraped against the windows. The sound filled the room like a whispering warning. I couldn't see any of that, of course, but I felt it somehow. The air around me seemed to change, lighter now, as though justice had drawn its first breath. I stepped outside the motel and walked toward the water's edge. The lake shimmered under the moon, the willow on the far bank swaying in its own quiet rhythm. Even from this distance, it looked alive, protective. For the first time since Eleanor's passing, I felt she was there beside me again, not as memory, but as presence. Her voice, gentle and sure, moved through the night air. You did what you had to, Henry. Now let time do the rest. I nodded. I will. A single leaf detached from the willow and drifted down to the water, spinning slowly until it touched the surface and floated away. That was enough of a sign for me. Tomorrow I'd go see Margaret again, finalize the papers, make sure everything stood as Eleanor and I intended. But tonight I'd simply watch the lake. I'd let the sound of the willow fill the silence where anger used to live. The motel light glowed behind me, small and steady. Across the water, the house lights flickered, and for a heartbeat I imagined Daniel standing at the window, looking toward the same horizon, realizing that love and greed can't share the same home. Maybe one day he'd understand. Until then, I'd keep faith with the willow, its branches patient, its roots deep. Because in the end, truth doesn't shout. It waits. The day they buried me, the wind came from the lake. It carried the scent of rain and pine, the soft rush of water through reeds. Beneath the willow, the mourners stood in a hush broken only by the low tremble of branches. Daniel stood apart from the others. His shoulders were square, but his face was pale, drawn tight by sleepless nights. Melissa held his arm, whispering something that vanished into the wind. Ben Hughes stood near the front, his hat pressed against his chest. Margaret was beside him, steady as always, her silver hair pinned neatly under the gray sky. She read a short verse I'd once marked in one of Eleanor's old books, a verse about patience and the measure of a life. When she closed it, the willow swayed. Its leaves brushed Daniel's coat like a benediction or a warning. After the crowd drifted away, Daniel lingered at the water's edge. He looked up at the house, the home that was no longer his, and then down at the soil, freshly turned. The earth was damp, dark, full of the scent of roots. Melissa touched his shoulder. It's over now, she said softly. But he shook his head. No, he whispered. It's just starting. A week later, they sat together in Margaret Fielding's office. The same woman who'd known their family for decades now sat behind a desk of oak, polished by time. The afternoon light caught the edges of her glasses as she looked from Daniel to Melissa. I appreciate you both coming, she said. There are matters we need to finalize regarding Henry's estate. Melissa straightened, her voice smooth. Of course. We've been expecting your call. Margaret nodded slowly, as if she already knew what was coming. I imagine you have. She opened a thick folder and withdrew an envelope sealed in wax. Before we begin, I'd like to share something, Mr. Whitmore left behind. A letter addressed to both of you. Daniel's throat tightened. Melissa smiled faintly, but her eyes flickered. Margaret unfolded the pages and began to read. My dear Daniel, if you're hearing this, then my time beneath the willow has ended and yours has begun. I imagine there's pain between us, maybe confusion, maybe anger, but I hope what you feel most in time will be understanding. You were born in that house. You learned to walk on its floors, to swim in its lake, and though you may have forgotten, your mother used to hum to you in the garden while you played beneath the tree. She said one day you'd outgrow its shade, but I never believed her. I knew a man always returns to where his roots first touch the earth. The house was never meant to be a prize. It was a promise. Eleanor and I built it with our hands, but we built it for hearts yours and anyone who might need the same peace we found there. Years ago, before she passed, we decided that when our time came, the house would go on serving others. That decision was written, witnessed, and sealed. The land now belongs to the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation, a trust that will turn our home into a retreat for those who've lost their way, as we once found ours. The lake, the willow, the light, they'll all remain, open to anyone who needs them. Daniel, this isn't to punish you. It's to protect what's sacred. You'll still have the rest of what we left, more than enough to live with comfort, and I hope with conscience. But the house, my boy, is no longer ours to own. It belongs to the peace it gives. Melissa, I don't know your heart as well as I once hoped to. I pray that someday you'll see this not as a loss, but as mercy. I wish you grace, even if you never wish it back. And to you both, I leave this one request: plant something, anything. A tree, a seed, a small act of care. Watch it grow, and remember that not everything that takes root belongs to you. Some things are meant to shelter others. Tree Wawena, Henry. Margaret folded the letter slowly and set it on the desk. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of the old ceiling fan above them. Daniel's hands trembled where they rested on his knees. So it's true, he whispered. He changed everything. Melissa's voice cracked. He had no right? Margaret's gaze lifted steady. He had every right. It was his will, his home, his love. Melissa started to argue, but Daniel reached for her hand just once, gently, and then let it go. His face was pale, eyes shining not with anger, but with something softer, sadder. I should have known, he said. The willow was always his witness. Margaret nodded. He trusted it to keep his promises. He looked down at the letter again, tracing his father's handwriting with his thumb. He wrote this by hand, he said softly. Every word. Yes, Margaret said. He wanted you to hear his voice one last time. For a moment, Daniel smiled through tears. I can hear him, he said. Still calm. Still right. Melissa stood abruptly. This is madness. We'll contest it. Margaret's tone stayed gentle but unyielding. You're welcome to try. But the trust is airtight. The court will see the same thing I do, a man who loved his family enough to protect them from themselves. Melissa's lips thinned. Without another word, she left the room. The door closed behind her with a sound that felt like an ending. Daniel remained seated. He reached for the letter, but his hand stopped halfway. Can I keep it? Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded. He'd want you to. He folded it carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket. Thank you, he said, voice rough. As he turned to leave, Margaret called after him. Daniel, she said softly. He forgave you before you asked. He paused in the doorway, eyes glistening. I think that's what hurts most, he said. Then he stepped into the sunlight. That evening, Daniel drove back to the lake. The road curved through the pines until the willow came into view, tall, silver, untouchable. He parked by the old fence and walked down to the bench beneath it. The air was still. The lake mirrored the sky, pink and gold in the setting sun. He sat down, pulled the letter from his pocket, and read it again. Each line felt heavier now, like stones laid gently in his hands. When he finished, he closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered. The branches stirred, their tips brushing his shoulder. A leaf fell into his lap. He held it there for a moment before letting it drift into the water. It floated out slowly, spinning once before settling among the ripples. Behind him, the house stood silent but alive. A pair of workmen had already begun clearing space by the garden for the new foundation sign. Tomorrow they'd start repairing the roof, repainting the shutters, breathing new life into old walls. Daniel watched the water shimmer, feeling both smaller and freer than he'd felt in years. The wind moved again, gentle as a sigh, carrying with it the faintest sound like Eleanor's laughter or his father's quiet hum. For the first time, he didn't turn away. He listened, and under the willow's shade, he finally began to understand what his father had meant all along. I used to believe time healed everything. Now I know time simply gives us the space to understand. The willow still stands where we planted it, its roots deep, its branches endless. From where I am, beyond the noise and rush of days, I can see its shadow stretch across the water in the late afternoon. The house is alive again. The laughter that floats from its porch isn't mine, or Eleanor's, or Daniel's, but that's as it should be. Life keeps moving forward. It's meant to. Sometimes when the wind rises off the lake, I can almost feel Eleanor beside me again. Her voice drifts through the leaves, soft and sure. "See, Henry," she whispers, "you kept your promise. You let love be the last word." And she's right. Love was the last word. Not the papers, or the property, or even the pain. Melissa left soon after the reading. She took her anger with her, and maybe that's for the best. Anger needs distance to burn itself out. Daniel stayed longer. He helped the workers paint, replaced the hinges I'd meant to fix for years. And every evening, when the sun dipped behind the pines, he sat beneath the willow with a book or with silence, which is sometimes the same thing. He didn't speak to me, of course he couldn't, but I felt him listening. The way a son listens when he's finally ready to hear what his father meant, not what he said. He found the photograph I'd left in the study drawer, the one of him as a child sitting between Eleanor and me. He framed it and placed it on the mantel. I like to think that, when he looks at it now, he doesn't see what he lost. He sees what remains. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without reopening the wound. If I could speak to him now, I'd tell him that guilt is just love turned inward. That every wrong step he took still led him back to where his roots began. I'd tell him the same thing I whispered to the willow before I left this world. We are all someone's home, even when we don't realize it. So the house stands. The lake shines. The willow sways. And peace quiet, steady peace rests in all the places where grief once lived. Looking back now, I see that forgiveness was never something I gave Daniel. It was something I gave myself. Because carrying resentment is like holding your breath underwater. It only hurts the one who refuses to surface. And if you listening to this have someone you've been carrying anger for, let it go. Sit beneath your own willow, whatever shape it takes, and remember we're not meant to keep what love teaches us. We're meant to pass it on. So plant something living. Let it grow in the open. That's how peace begins root by root, hand by hand. And if this story found its way to your heart, share it with someone who needs reminding that kindness never dies. Tell them old Henry said so. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, stories about love, family, and the quiet strength that keeps us standing, stay a while. Leave a word, plant a thought, subscribe to the kindness that keeps us connected. Because in the end, that's all any of us leave behind. The shade we've grown for someone else.